of your lives. Because I'm here to talk to you about the greatest threat that we as an electronic modern civilization face, and that is from an electromagnetic pulse, which can come from the sun in the shape of a solar superstorm, like the 1859 Carrington event that destroyed telegraph systems all over the world when it happened. And if something like that happened today, it would basically be the end of civilization all over the world, except in Russia and China, where they have protected their electric grids and other critical infrastructures from electromagnetic pulse, which I should add, for those who have never heard of it, EMP is basically a super energetic radio wave. It's a radio wave that's got so much energy in it that it can destroy electronics across vast areas. In the case of a superstorm like the Carrington event, it can destroy electronics across the entire world. That happened in 1859. The telegraph systems had just been deployed all over the world. They were destroyed. Telegraph keys were actually melted. Telegraph stations caught on fire. A telegraph key from 1859, if you look at it, is a really robust, clunky piece of equipment. It would take a lot of energy to melt that, but that's what happened. The Carrington event in 1859, that solar superstorm melted the telegraph keys. Our modern microelectronics are literally a billion times more vulnerable to EMP than the primitive electronics of 1859. And if that would happen, it would be the end of our civilization. Billions of people would die because everything depends upon electricity, including food and water. The Congressional EMP Commission on which I served estimated that if we had a solar superstorm today, or if there was a nuclear EMP attack on this country, that we could lose 90% of our population to starvation, disease, and societal collapse in 1 year, 12 months, if the grid is unprotected. A nuclear EMP attack, that's the other thing we were very concerned about on the EMP Commission. Anyone can perform that that's got a nuclear missile or a nuclear warhead and a meteorological balloon. If you can get the balloon up above 30 kilometers, anywhere over the United States, it's going to cause a huge magnetic field to cause electric grids to collapse. North Korea's got a couple of satellites circling over us. They orbit and over us several times a day. And they may be armed with what we call super EMP weapons. These are nuclear weapons that are specially designed to make extraordinarily powerful EMP fields. Just one of these weapons, if those satellites are armed, at 300 kilometers altitude, could put an EMP field over all of North America. Cars would start, airplanes would fall out of the sky, you wouldn't have any water in your house. We only have enough food to feed 330 million people for 30 days at normal consumption rates, and that food would immediately begin to spoil. Gas pipelines would explode. You'd probably have firestorms in cities. Nuclear reactors would go Fukushima. We've got 100 nuclear reactors that would spread radioactivity everywhere. But most people would die from starvation, disease, and societal collapse. We know from hurricanes that it only takes about 72 hours for the veneer of civilization to disappear. Usually when people miss their first meal, the normal rules of law and order disintegrate. We know this from many long experience with hurricanes. So something like this, that took out electric grids across the whole country, for a protracted period of time, would literally be the end of our civilization. The last form of an EMP threat is non-nuclear EMP weapons. There are devices that can be purchased from electronics magazines. For example, there's a device called the EMP suitcase. If you've got $50,000, you don't even need a license.
Thanks for warming up the crowd.
It's not intended to be used as a weapon. It has legitimate, peaceful, industrial uses, peaceful purposes, but it puts out 100,000 volts per meter, over a relatively short range of 100 yards. But if you're a terrorist, or a criminal or a madman, and you've got $50,000, and you bought one of these things, and you even need a license to buy one, you could put it in the trunk of your car, drive the car over to a VHV transformer substation, and we've arrived at a place, technologically, where one person can topple the technological pillars of civilization for an entire big city, like New York, or Boston, or Salt Lake City. So these are threats I've been worrying about most all my professional career. And all my professional career, I've been in the national security community worrying about nuclear weapons, biological weapons, chemical weapons, but the thing that has always worried me most is the EMP threat.
It's a populist.
And by the way, Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, just because a nuclear weapon is used, they consider this to be a dimension of cyber warfare. It's not nuclear warfare, it's a dimension of cyber warfare. That's because a nuclear EMP attack is unlike any other kind of nuclear attack you've heard of. You know, the weapon, when it goes off, it's going off in the atmosphere of space at very high altitude. If you're standing onto the ground directly beneath the explosion, you wouldn't even hear it. There'd be no blast, there'd be no radioactive fallout, there'd be nothing harmful to human life. The EMP itself is harmless, it would pass harmlessly through your body. But it would destroy think of it as an anti-technology weapon. It subtracts technology from the equation of our civilization. And all of the things that we need to support a population of 330 million people would go away. Before we had electric grids and modern technologies, the population of the United States was about 30 billion people, not 330 million. When you lose the technology, the population has to fall back to the levels that can be sustained with whatever remains. That's why we calculated that we could lose up to 90% of our population. Now, the reason I'm here today is because, you know, this is an enormous crisis for freedom and civilization. In order to be free, you've got to be alive. And so I'm hoping people here will include in their agenda getting this country protected against EMP. Washington has been trying to do it for 20 years, and they haven't been doing it because of the incompetence and corruption within the government. Congress has tried. They've passed bills, the Critical Infrastructure Protection Act. President Trump has tried. He passed an EMP executive order. And when America was a constitutional republic, the America I grew up in, when the commander-in-chief passed an executive order, the government is supposed to implement it. When Congress passes a law, like the Critical Infrastructure Protection Act, it's supposed to be implemented. But we now have this thing called the deep state, a permanent government bureaucracy, kind of a new aristocracy, that thinks it knows better than Congress, thinks it knows better than presidents, thinks it knows better than all the scientists and strategic experts. And they're going to do what they want to do. And they're deeply corrupt. And what they want to do happens to line up with the business interests of big utilities, like the electric companies. Because they know these people that are supposed to enforce the laws and enforce the executive orders, that there's a rotating door, and they can step into a great big fat job in the private sector if they do the bidding of the utilities while they're in government. So that's the problem, that's the situation. So what is the answer when government doesn't work anymore? When we have a new Rome that's so corrupt that it can't even protect the lives of its people? Well, the Federalist Papers told us what to do. You know, the people are the last resort against tyranny. And when government fails to do its job to protect the lives of the people and even their own children, it's time for the people to take that power back into their own hands. And I came here today because Utah is taking a step in that direction. You know, there's a bill going before your state legislature that's saying we're not waiting for Washington. Washington hasn't done its job for 20 years.
That's right.
We're going to keep the lights on in Utah. We're going to harden our grid against EMP and cyber threats. If that happens, it'll be a giant step back toward being a constitutional republic the way the founders imagined.
Yeah!
By failing to act on this existential threat. And the state governments have the right and the duty to step in to fill the vacuum and to protect the people when the federal government fails to do it. And it would set a precedent so that other states can do that. And if you're willing to take on a national security issue and do it here in a state, that means that all the other things, that's a very high ground. National security is supposed to be the most important constitutional obligation of the federal government.
That's
and
right.
If they're not doing that, and the states take it over, there's all kinds of other things that the federal government thinks it should do can fall back into the hands of the states. When we can restore something like state rights. And if the state fails to do it, you know, you can do it at a community level. You can harden a town. You know, don't wait for, if the states fail to protect you, then harden your communities. And of course, the founders understood, you know, the America that the Constitution was written for was a people who believed, who were suspicious of government. And it was part of their makeup, part of the exclusivity of the American character, not to trust government, not to take hands out from government, not to expect government to come to the rescue, but to be a rugged individualist, to believe in self-sufficiency, to be your own first best line of defense for your family and your community. And if you do that, you can have a peaceful second American Revolution just by saying no to Washington. No, I'm not going to let you inject drugs into my body, you know, that don't pass FDA. No, I'm not going to let you leave my state and children and our communities vulnerable to EMP and cyber warfare because you're not doing your job. I'm taking over. I'm getting in the driver's seat. I'm going to do that. So this is an opportunity to start that peaceful second American Revolution. And that's what we need. You know, we need it to save this country and Western civilization and the Judeo-Christian values that made America great and free in the first place.
That's right.
Because the values that are being pushed on us, the attempt to turn the American people into sheep, that's not a direction, that's not a society that's even worth saving. You know, our totalitarian adversaries, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, if we let that happen, they will have won World War III without fighting a shot. And that's what they want to happen. They want us to sit back and do nothing and be vulnerable and let our own federal government grow in power until they follow the Chinese model. Don't let that happen. All of you who came here today, I salute you. You are the hope for our children and grandchildren for restoring a constitutional republic to America. I thank you for having me here today.
He's awesome. Yeah.